It's a great pleasure to be speaking while some of my friends are here. See some old friends, Wendy is there, and several others, and Professor Gupta, Professor Mukhopadhyay. I've followed your work intently, used a lot of Charu's work in my books, and Professor Chamanlal, of course. So thank you all. And I know there are lots of students here and other academics. So and I think there was a little bit thing about Hindi. So if you want, I can go bilingual, or I think I'll do that. That'll keep the thing of the Hindi department also. There was some, people upset about all of us going in English. Okay, so I thought I would speak on sedition and conspiracy. And again, like Charu's work, I have not directly worked on proscription of literature, but it is very much, it's a sub-theme that I look at, so to say. And I thought it'll be interesting to connect up how, because proscription is about sedition. Yeah, so I thought I would explore for the audience the connection between sedition and conspiracy, how these two words are interconnected, and that may say something. So we can think about how it connects to proscription later, but the connection between the two. So what I'm talking about today is actually, so I'm going to enter sedition. Instead of entering it through proscription, I'm going to enter it through trial histories. Yeah, through law history, legal history, not history of law, but legal history. And what I'm presenting today is part of my larger work on the revolutionaries. And so I'm working on this, just trying to finish this manuscript on the Lahore conspiracy case trial, also known as Bhagat Singh's trial, which is a misnomer. It wasn't Bhagat Singh, it was actually Sukhdev's trial. And one of the, trials that went on for quite some time and was very famous, big trial in its time. So 1929 to 1931. Yeah, so I'm going to enter it through the legal history and then talk a little bit about the Lahore conspiracy case trial. So just to give you a little bit of background about trial histories, sedition trial histories. Now there are some famous sedition trials that most people have heard about, which is Tilak's trial or Gandhi's trial or Maulana Azad's trial. But I'm going to talk about some other trials that are not that well known and yet are an integral part of this history of proscription. So the period from 1890s to 1940s is a period where there was a number of sedition trials, and in which the colonial state mislabeled and suppressed the nationalist press, the pamphlet culture, and several individuals. So proscription, the enactment of proscription, one was you proscribe the material, ban the material. Then the other was you take it to court. So I'm telling that story today. So, so there are, and it's interesting, once people were taken to court for sedition, it was the print industry that led to the court trials, to the sedition trials, but the print and the idea was that sedition trials will stamp out the print industry, but actually the print industry thrived on these sedition trials. Yeah, and they took advantage and publicized the trials even more. So actually they made for a lot of nationalist propaganda. So it was an interesting relationship between press being trialed and those trials then further feeding the agenda of the press. Now, despite the asymmetry of the power in the trial, the reportage familiarized the public with language of dissent and resistance. And that is the big aspect of these trials, that once the reportage started, once these trials became very famous and they were being daily reported in newspapers, they actually started creating a language. They started feeding the language of dissent publicly. So even newspapers like Civil and Military Gazette or like English newspapers that were sympathetic to the empire, even they were carrying the news of the trial. So in that way, if we were thinking about sedition, so even those newspapers were carrying seditious material. And that was the power of these trials. And the trials also help us understand that although Indian nationalism was internally differentiated, it had several strands, but what was common to them were that all strands, all forms of resistance were threatened by law. And what the state was threatening was really the vocabulary, the tone and the emotions associated with resistance and dissent. And this is like a carryover that Professor Jamanlal has also talked about, that you see today also. So the way one is talking, what one is talking, the vocabulary that is being used, and the emotion associated with it is what is being banned, not just the piece of writing. So the banning or the proscription goes beyond simply the words. Now, just quickly as a background, sedition trials were not unique to India. Sedition trials by the British were being deployed in India and England. Yeah, so just giving you an example of a very famous trial that many of you may know about, the trial of Oscar Wilde, yeah, in 1895. Now, what was that trial was not simply the fact, was not just same-sex love, but his words that expressed his passion for men. So what was being trialed was his words and the inappropriate affection that they displayed. So sedition was associated with words, and especially words that conveyed an inappropriate affection, or the ones that led to what one calls disaffection. Yeah. So an important element of sedition or proscription was this idea of disaffection. So I just want you to hold on to this term because it keeps coming up over and over in the colonial records. And around the time of Oscar Wilde's trials, there was one trial, for the very first trial, the Bangabasi trial in 1891. Now, the Bangabasi trial was a Bengali publication that criticized the government's attempt to raise the age of consent. So the trial actually criminalized the word disaffection and also connected it to violence. That the publication was trying to create disaffection, which in turn will lead to violence. Now, after this time, we see several other trials coming up, and then you have trials of Tilak and all these people, Tilak and Gandhi and all, but you also have trials of the revolutionaries. Yeah. So and we know about the most famous ones, but there were several dozens of trials. So you have the Alipur bomb case in 1908, Nasik conspiracy case in 1910, Lahore conspiracy case in 1915, Meerut conspiracy case, Gwalior conspiracy case, Nangla, Audh, Dhaka, Tirunelveli, Madaripur, Barisal, Banaras, Mandalay, Peshawar, Kakori. So there are so many conspiracy cases. Now it's interesting, whenever the revolutionaries are being tried, their trials are titled revolutionary conspiracy case trials. So I'll come back to this. So another kind of sedition trials that are occurring are revolutionary trials. Now, the general significance of these trials is, so what is at stake in these trials? What's important when we are studying their history? Now, the at stake is really the presumed affection between the state and the people. The tacit consent of the colonized, the collective, for the British rule in India. That is what is at stake. So what the state is doing is that through speech, through writing, or through action, what you're doing is you're rupturing or disrupting that tacit consent. And the individual who was being tried is seen as a mischief monger who chose the public medium of newspaper, books, pamphlets, poster, or staging plays, singing songs to spread disaffection, which is an estrangement or alienation from the state. And the presumption here is that that state of affection actually exists between the state and the larger collective, and it is the individual who is the mischief monger. And you see this word affection, this play of affection and disaffection, you see even in Gandhi's writing. When he is trialed, he says there's one famous quote from his, what he says in the court is, affection cannot be manufactured or regulated by law. So when they are talking about sedition, what they're really talking about affection, love for the state. Okay, so that's one big thing when we are looking at sedition trials, the connection between sedition and the idea of disaffection. Second is there is a presumed state of crisis. Each time there's a trial, in the trial transcripts and the court records, what you find is the state presenting itself as being under siege. and using a discursive state of crisis to justify emergency legislation. So, this is interesting how when there is no war, when there is just peace, and generally emergency legislation is associated with wartime or with in a situation of, duress. But in a general peaceful time, how do you actually start using emergency laws? So that's another question tied to proscription. That why is the state feeling threatened? Or what is the state of crisis that is impelling the state to ban something? Yeah, so each time there's a trial, the state presents itself as being under siege, and there is some sort of a crisis situation that is called upon or imagined or created or discursively constituted to justify the emergency legislation. Now, these sedition trials also create new categories of criminals who are supposed to be casted out of the body politic, who are supposed to be, taken out and put somewhere else, and most likely to in a jail or sent to the gallows. So a person like Oscar Wilde goes from being an aesthete or somebody, a playwright or a writer, to being a pervert. So a new category of pervert or perversion is created. Journalists become traitors, and revolutionaries become terrorists. So there is a new sense of criminality and crime associated with sedition. So, and that's why it's interesting to look at these trials. Now, this is the general history of sedition trials, in which is located the Lahore conspiracy case trial. Now, I know most of you would be familiar with the story of Bhagat Singh and the trial, but I'll just give the audience a few dates. I'm a historian, so I have to locate it in time and place. Yeah, so just a few things for you to remember. So HSRA, or Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, is the organization that Chandrasekhar Azad and Bhagat Singh formed together. And it's come out of HRA, Hindustan Republican Association, which was formed by Sachinnath Sanyal and Bismil. So now these guys carry out a murder, in December 1928. They murdered this British police officer by name of John Saunders in Lahore. That's the first thing they do in December 1928. Then in April 1929, they throw a bomb in the Delhi Assembly. And the Delhi Assembly bomb case comes to an end in June. But in the time this trial was unfolding, back in Lahore, the police discovers a bomb factory. And along in the bomb factory, they also catch some revolutionaries who become government's witness, who become king's witness. They become approvers. And that establishes the connection between Saunders' murder and the Delhi Assembly bomb case. Now, this connection wasn't evident to them. What they had suspected, but they didn't have firm evidence, but now they do. So as soon as the Delhi bomb case trial finishes, Batukeshwar Dutt and Lahore and Bhagat Singh are taken back to Lahore. Yeah, and in July 1929, the Lahore conspiracy case trial begins. Now, the trial does not really progress very well. Yeah, it's going on in the Sessions Court, and all of you must have seen movies or heard about or read in school about the hunger strikes of the revolutionaries. So the revolutionaries go on hunger strike, the trial doesn't progress. So finally, the Viceroy uses his emergency powers to set up a special tribunal in October 1930. And within few months, the tribunal wraps up the case. And as you know, the three of them are sentenced to be hanged. And in March, they are hanged, and some of them are, Sanyal is acquitted. So many of them receive jail terms of varying years. So that's what the trial's history is. Yeah. Now, the trial is unfolding in the period of, in the 1920s. Now, what is happening in the 1920s that impacts the trial? Now, what we're looking at in 1920s is it's a post-Bolshevik revolution era. There is a very big perceived communist threat and a Bolshevik threat. There is a rising labor movement in India. This is the 1920s is a period for Kamgar Girni union strike, one of the biggest strikes. Several lakh workers have gone on strike. So there is a rising labor movement in India. Second, there is a brutal suppression of the Easter uprising in Ireland, and there is Jallianwala Bagh that has happened. Yeah. So, and this is so that's outside. That's like use of military in peaceful time, and Gandhian mass movement and youth mobilization along with that. And there is introduction of constitutional reforms. So the politics, the world politics and the empire, politics of the empire is shifting. It's swiveling on a new swivel. And this is the time that there is a greater demand for more acceptable forms of governance. There's a greater discomfort with use of military force and use of military tribunals on civilians. So in this scenario, the revolutionaries present a slightly tricky problem. Yeah, what do we do with them? Because these are people whom the state can easily kill. They can easily be an encounter, or they could have easily used coercion, but as they do in the frontier areas. But why not with the revolutionaries? They can just kill them in the jail, but they don't. They put them on trial, and the trials are very costly. So why are they trialing them? What is the when the mainstay of the colonial state is coercion? Why did it trial the revolutionaries? And how does the state respond to perceived threat of civil emergency in the peacetime in a colony? A situation in which it could have otherwise taken recourse to military power to maintain civil and political order. Why is it going for trials? So, and then the big question for today's presentation is, how does the history of revolutionary conspiracy trials further our understanding of sedition and thereby of colonial governance? What does it really tell us? Yeah. Now, very briefly, I'll tell you about the historiography of these trials, because there is a lot of work done on this. And trial histories appear in two kinds of histories. Yeah. So one is the literary and aesthetic surveillance of sedition. Yeah, which is a lot of work is there. Robert Danton's work, Sukeshi Kamra, Henry Schwartz. So they look at literary surveillance and aesthetic surveillance, and the trials appear in that story. Or the trials appear in the history of colonial information networks and surveillance. So like work of Kim Wagner, C.A. Bailey, and Dipkanta Lahire Chaudhary. In their works, trial again makes an appearance. So two different historiographies are engaging with these revolutionary trials. Now, now the Lahore conspiracy trial itself, when the story of the trial is written, generally historians are focused on the hunger strikes. The trial itself has rarely been the object of study. Now, one person who does study the trial or write about the trial is A.G. Noorani. Yeah, he's a lawyer who's written several books on trials and court cases in India. Now, according to him, the trial is a show trial. It's a faux performance of due process of law, and goes to show how the colonial state sacrificed the high ideals of principle of rule of law. Now, both the historiography, like writings of A.G. Noorani and the writings on Bengal trials, especially the ones like by Dipkanta Lahire Chaudhary, they both talk about failure. And, in the last talk also, Charu was also talking about, Professor Gupta was also talking about failure. Yeah, so, but unlike her, they both talk about the failed state. Yeah, or maybe her work also, that the policy did not really succeed. So, but both of them are appearing arrive at the idea of failure from opposite ends of the ideological spectrum. So for Noorani, the failure is basically in miscarriage of justice. And for Dipkanta Lahire Chaudhary, the failure lies in reining in the revolutionaries. So the trials really failing to really stop revolutionism. So, but both posit failure because there is an assumption of an ideal state. An ideal state should have been able to rein in the revolutionaries and to ensure against miscarriage of justice. So, but what that ideal state is never, talked about in their work. So this notion of failure has come to attach itself to revolutionary histories and also the histories of these trials, that they're actually failing. Even if they're failing, then why are they using the trial? What's the big deal here? And so another criticism of the historiography is that a lot of the analysis is lost because the focus is on revolutionaries or on the trials and not on the word conspiracy. And I think the key to understanding the trial and the utility of the trial for the state and for sedition is to understand the word conspiracy. Now, the word conspiracy in legal terms, the word conspiracy actually appears in the British law of evidence. So there is this book by Woodruff, the British law of evidence, on British law of evidence, the word appears there. And the law of evidence is basically rules and legal principles that govern the kind of evidence that could be received by a court, the manner of its evaluation, and how to ascertain if the evidence is strong enough or not before a judge arrived at the judgment. So the word conspiracy is actually used in that. So what does the word conspiracy mean? Now, the word conspiracy is used for crimes that exist before and beyond the actual commission of the criminal act. That is, the crimes that one intended to commit, but may not have been actually committed. Yeah, for example, you and I meet and we plan to, who would we like to murder? Okay. I'm just trying to think of a good example of somebody I would like to murder. Okay, okay, sorry, all my violent fantasies are manifesting themselves the moment I start talking about conspiracy. Anyway, so you and I discussed that we want to murder X, but we don't actually murder it. But the fact that we talked about it, yeah, there was an intention in itself makes this a crime. So we don't need to go and kill that person. We can just talk about it and police can pick us up. Okay, that's one. Second is conspiring or the verbalization of intent. To say you want to kill or loot. And then both of us agree, we have a covenant to commit the act. We agree with one another to kill and loot. That was a crime itself. We don't need to, first we talk about it, just the verbalization, and then the covenant. We agree that we will do it. We may not have done it, but the fact that both you and I agreed to do it is enough. So one may not have acted upon the intent or fulfilled the covenant to commit the crime, yet it was a crime. Yeah. Now the third was conspiracy required a collective. There had to be there had to be more than one person. So there had to be a common design and an action of more than one mind. So the crime of conspiracy actually presumes a collective. It took two or more people to conspire or to bring a conspiracy to fruition. So now it didn't matter if I went halfway, I went to the Kakori train, I didn't get on it, I ran away from there, I was not the one who shot. So I could have been part of the action and yet I would be culpable. Yeah, so culpability was not whether I killed or not. Yeah, and that's the thing that is used for Sukhdev, because Sukhdev didn't fire ever, but he was hanged. So how did we establish the culpability? So that is the thing with conspiracy. So criminal conspiracy was thus not only about an actual crime, which was killing, looting, bombing, but an imagined crime and an intended collective criminal body, which left ample room for stretching the definition to subsume within it the known and the unknown. So you see, it gave state a great deal of leeway. So now, what is the connection between conspiracy and revolutionism? Now, the revolutionism was, yes, great, thank you for that. Yeah, yes, very much. It's connected with that. It's connected with the Judeo-Christian concept of sin. So it's connected with revolutionism because it's reduced to conspiracy because revolutionism had failed to topple the imperial state. Probably for it to be called, for revolution to be revolution called revolution, it had to succeed. Yeah, as conspiracy, it could be easily painted as crime against the state, which was now the aggrieved party. So the definitional elasticity of conspiracy served the imperial state well. For rounding up the revolutionaries, तूने उसके साथ चाय पिया, चल जेल में. The letter came to your house, you are going to be jailed. So anybody could be picked up basically, and put them and to be put on the trial. So further, so that's the value of calling revolutionary crimes conspiracy. That was now, what did this conspiracy do? What was the role that the conspiracy was playing? How was it connected to sedition now? Now, conspiracy, at the heart of the conspiracy was colonial fear of sedition. It stoked the fire of sedition. It continuously kept it boiling. The reason being that, the very idea of conspiracy, who is involved, how many people are involved, what is the extent, what is the depth, how many cities, how many people, all that was, there were so many unknowns in the word conspiracy that it fed the idea of peril, of subversion and embattlement. Yeah. So as the state began to uncover revolutionary plots, it began to do what scholarship calls conspiracy theorizing. That is, imagining, discussing, speculating about the actions of the natives. And that became an official mode of knowledge production that reflected state's attempt to impose an order on an uncontainable circulation of seditious information, despite its surveillance network. So it's a way of controlling. It's a way of containment, yeah, of what cannot be contained. So conspiracy theorizing as a communicative practice is a multivocal political strategy. And it has, in various other contexts, it has been used in a variety of ways. So, and it was, the potential for sedition was highest when it combined actions, writing, speech, and violence. So when they're dealing with the revolutionaries, they're dealing with all three. So violence is there because, they are violent, they make bombs. And then there is the fear of the armed native. In the Arms Act and all that, it's been around, and the armed ascetics and also their control and all of that. So there is a fear of the armed native always. Second, the actions of the revolutionaries, not just bombing and killing, yeah, but their ability to stun and catch the state unawares. Yeah, because they are working underground, their cellular nature of their organizations. You don't know when, who's who and when they're going to attack. Yeah. And also their peripatetic nature. They're moving around. They're wandering from one place to another. They don't have a fixed spatial location. So this triggered the administrative anxiety. And you already know stories of Azad and Surya Sen being known as Behrupias. They kept changing their guises. Yeah. So the state doesn't know. It's constantly anxious. Who is the revolutionary? They don't know. And the revolutionaries are also writing. And I'll just talk about this and then wind up. So, you see, they're publishing a lot of, Professor Chamanlal mentioned it, Professor Gupta, and in the morning also we had conversation about the underground literature. Now this underground literature or the banned literature, proscribed revolutionary literature is freely circulating in university campuses and newspapers like Jugantar, Sandhya, Aaj, Pratap, they're all appearing in libraries, public places. And this revolutionary literature actually serves as a proxy for the physical appearance of the revolutionary. So the revolutionary is underground and yet he is not. Yeah, so the police and administration is continuously not only tracking the physical revolutionary, but also this material and trying to destroy it. And the interesting thing is that the revolutionaries always intended this material to be intercepted and read by the police and the administrators. So it was not meant to remain hidden from the police. It was meant to be intercepted. Yeah. And the idea was to flood the public space with these materials and to create disquiet. So their cunning lay not in keeping these materials hidden from the sight of administrators, but in keeping the depth and scale of their penetration into the Indian society unascertainable. So वो कितना फैले हुए, कितने डीप में गए हुए, कितने लोगों को पकड़ लिया, मतलब कितने लोगों से जुड़े हुए, ये नहीं पता चले. हाँ, तो मटेरियल जैसे होता है ना, वो जो लेटर जो है वो इंटरसेप्ट करना बहुत जरूरी है. हाँ, वो लेटर लिखा इसलिए जा रहा है कि इंटरसेप्ट हो जाए. हाँ, दैट इज द लॉजिक कि यार वो मैं भेजूंगा, वो पकड़ेंगे. सो द प्रिंटेड वर्ड एम्बॉडीड द रेवोल्यूशनरीज इन दैट वे. Yeah, so how should we understand the government's sense of fear in crisis? How do we understand this information panic? Is it really a sign of powerlessness and failure? I'm coming back to the question of failure. So I will say, and this is what the paper is very long, so I'm just summarizing. The fear and panic and anxiety do not necessarily have to be connected with any real danger or an underlying cause. So this crisis is a discursive one, yeah? But neither does it reflect the state's powerlessness or its failure. Yeah, because it is a discourse that the state creates. Yeah, and it invokes it to articulate the official's sense of belonging to a community that is under siege and one that is requiring safeguarding from the deceit of the inscrutable natives. So it actually allows the British to go ahead, the state to go ahead with even more, it gives them, it empowers them to enact emergency legislation. That's the power of this failure, so-called failure. So their success lies in actually failing. Okay. It's like what Mark Harrison says about in his book, Climate and Constitutions, that, we think of the British environmental policy or British, this whole thing of climates and constitutions that they were trying to change the Indian constitution and Indian constitution money, the physical body, and make it, racialize it and to make it white, but they were failing. So Mark Harrison says, actually the success of the state lies in this failure, because had the Indian constitutions been changed, they would have become white. And if they become white, the racial difference gets erased. So why would they want to succeed? So actually the colonial enterprise's strength lies in its failure, because that's where they succeed. Okay, so I'll conclude. So what am I trying to do here? What I have done for you guys over here is, I hope successfully, is to establish how sedition and conspiracy are discursively connected, and how we can see the enactment of this in the context of revolutionary conspiracy trials. And another thing that I'm doing is that I challenge the idea that the trials represent the failure of colonial state. And in fact, what I argue over here is that the conspiracy trials were primarily an evidence of the staying power of the colonial state. That's how it stayed. So the trials demonstrated the colonial state's ability to close ranks in the face of collective acts of sedition or what the state perceived as crisis. Like today we have Hindu Khatre Mein. So that's a state of perceived crisis that allows closure of ranks. And the trials afforded the colonial state an sort of very efficient judicial instruments of pacification for a rather violent and tenacious oppositional minority comprising of middle-class provincial youth. Now, had there not been middle-class provincial youth, the state may have just used some other method. But these trials were really good instruments for that, for, instead, why take the burden of doing the encounter and looking bad? Yeah, let's have a trial. It was that. And these trials were also very good political mechanisms with the potential to satisfy the moderate liberals and hardliners back home in Whitehall and in the metropole. Because now they were under greater scrutiny after the crushing Easter Uprising and Jallianwala Bagh. The state in India is under greater scrutiny. And this period has also been theorized as Third Empire or something, I'm forgetting, by some of these people like John Darwin and Madalini Sinha. They talk about that. Is it Third Empire or Second Empire or something like that? So they say like the tenor of the state shifts at this time. So there is a different kind of an accountability that is being asked of them back home, and the trials allow for that kind of accountability to be established. Okay, so I'm stopping here.